Go ahead.
It seems like one of the major sticking points here with the standalone package is the pay for it that
Yeah.
you're cutting from the IRS. Do you all think that it's urgent enough to take that out and try to pass it without that pay for in order to get more Democrat support and possibly have Senator Schumer come on board with it?
Yeah, the statement I gave on the floor today is if they don't like the pay for, then show us Israel funding with another pay for. I think that it would divide our caucus. I think most of our caucus would like a pay for, but we're not married that it has to be the IRS. Wants to add on that? Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
So you say that this would have overwhelming bipartisan support, but Leader McConnell has been very adamant about adding Ukraine onto Israel funding. Is he wrong on this issue, or how are you guys planning on presenting it to the rest of the Republican conference? Right.
I don't know who's wrong and right when it comes to Ukraine funding. I think it's going to take 100 years in history to judge who's right on the Ukraine funding. But I may not be right on Ukraine funding, but I know I'm right on funding Israel now, and I know I'm right on securing the border. Go ahead.
Is the pay for a line in the sand? Does there have to be a pay for attached to
JD,
this
you want
for you
to give
vote
it
for
one
it?
shot?
Yeah, sure. Look, I won't say whether it's a line in the sand. I would like a pay for, but there are a million different ways you could pay for this thing. It's $14 billion, which is a very small amount of money in the United States federal budget. What I find so interesting about this is, and this is relevant to one of the earlier questions too, is the Democrats actually don't seem that concerned about the pay for. They mention it a little bit. They occasionally offer it up as a criticism of our approach, but what they're most preoccupied with is that funding Israel now doesn't fund Ukraine now. And you always ask them, okay, well, why do they have to be together? Well, because funding Ukraine is really important. Well, that doesn't answer my question. Why do they have to be together? Again, there are 6 different opinions, if you count Senator Lee, represented up here about how we should approach the Ukraine question. There is division within the Republican conference. Why do they have to be together? The Democrats don't have an answer. The real reason they have to be together is to provide political cover for Joe Biden. That's all this is about. We are holding Israel hostage because Joe Biden doesn't want to debate on his Ukraine policy. I might lose that debate, but we should at least have it.
And by the way, let me also point out that Joe Biden has said he would veto this. Joe Biden has said he would veto Israeli or funding for Israel, which I find remarkable. That gets very little coverage, and I think it's shameful. So,
Go ahead.
You made the comparison of Ukraine to Vietnam, but as some Republicans who support Ukraine funding, like Senator Graham has mentioned, there are not Americans dying in Ukraine. There are no American troops on the ground in Ukraine. What are your thoughts on the benefit, cost benefit?
Gosh. Years before we had American troops in Vietnam, we started off with just supervision, with leadership there, teaching the South Vietnamese how to use weapons. And next we sent trainers, and I do think we probably do have trainers in Ukraine, if the truth be known. And we're flirting with the nuclear power right now. Never before has America bought weapons to shoot at a nuclear power. So to me, this smells so much like Vietnam. What's the next step? I don't have to remind anybody that we lost 5 soldiers' lives this week. And I don't know if they've been doing the same type of training back here in America, if they wouldn't have died. But the fact that we have 5 soldiers there died in the Mediterranean Sea. And then we had 50-some American soldiers injured as well. So we certainly have soldiers in harm's way. And we've had a minimal response from this president. So to me, it just seems like this is how Vietnam started. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Senator. Your conference has supported greater funding for border security along the southern border, and that was included in the president's original package with Israel aid. Do you agree that border funding should be considered with the same urgency as Israel aid? And if so, do you plan to insist on it, perhaps in conjunction with this aid, maybe in exchange for or in replacement of the IRS cuts?
Well, first of all, what the president offered in this package as far as securing our border is a joke. It actually makes our border more porous, that he creates a process that makes amnesty more efficient. He does nothing to slow down the magnet that he has turned on to bring people from overseas. As far as I'm concerned, my number one priority is to secure our border. I would even put it ahead of, yes, even ahead of Israel funding, because I think that our safety and security is the number one concern of folks back home. And that safety and security starts with a challenge at the open border right now. So I would prioritize actually securing our border. But right now, our own conference would disagree on how to do that. We share in the same goal, but we disagree on how to do that. The Democrats can't agree on how to do that. And certainly anything the House sends over here is dead on arrival. The White House, it has anything the House sends over, it's dead on arrival. And anything they poke back at the House, it's dead on arrival. We are infinitely far apart on how to solve the border issue. But I do think that most Americans think that this is the number one concern facing them right now. They are numb to inflation. But with 300 Americans dying every day from fentanyl poisoning, human trafficking on the rise, the cartel alive and well with the presence in the state of Kansas and every one of these states, this is my number one priority, is to secure the border.
Yeah, I would add, with regard to fentanyl, it has now arrived in our states, Kansas, Wyoming, Ohio, Missouri. These are states that are in the center of our country. They're not on the border. But now fentanyl is in all of our states. And it's coming from Mexico. And it's coming through mules. And when there is a surge of border crossings by people, causing ICE to have to move human resources there, it means that fentanyl is being smuggled in somewhere else along the border in a less high-profile way. And they're almost always matching up. So you see the surge in people. That automatically means there's a surge in fentanyl coming 100 miles or more down the border. This kind of thing is what makes it a priority for Americans. And we are working on solutions that we hope will bring some discipline and credibility and response from the Biden administration. We're working on benchmarks. So certain funding would be available if they reduce border crossings in some way, because we can't think of other ways to compel the Biden administration to enforce the law.
And let me just be the wet blanket here for a minute. Joe Biden and his administration has zero interest in border security. The very first thing that he did in office was reverse the policies that were working. Title 42 remained in Mexico, fought in court to keep them in place as long as we could. This is the stated objective now. What we have right now, this is not an accident. This is the policy of the Democrat Party. So I don't believe for a minute that Democrats are serious about dealing on the border at all, because it's just not what they want to do. So I think it's a bit, I am for the strongest border protection policy we could possibly get, but I am also skeptical when you have an executive branch that's not interested in executing the law, which is what we have right now.
I just wanted to follow up on something you mentioned. Something that I've heard from some Senate Democrats is that if you pass Israel aid without Ukraine aid, it could send the wrong message to Putin. What is your reaction to that?
Well, I think that, first of all, these guys are so preoccupied with what messages we send, and they neglect the fact that the strongest message that we can send is to have a strong homeland, to manufacture enough weapons to support America's challenges all over the world. This idea that talking tough and thumping our chest and writing checks is the way to dissuade Putin or Xi is ridiculous. They don't care about how tough we talk. They care about how strong we are. And what we're talking about, what we've been talking about, is not stretching ourselves so thin so that we layer a lot of tough talk on an overstretched country that invites people to do very dangerous things to us. The other thing is look, the Democrats could have a Ukraine policy debate tomorrow. I mean, you mentioned, Marcia, who left earlier, Senator Blackburn mentioned this point, and it was a very smart point. We're not voting on anything today. We're literally not voting on a single thing today. We are 3 days from a government shutdown, and they're not going to bring anything up to the Senate floor. They could pass the Israeli package, and then we could have a debate on Ukraine the next day. They are choosing not to do that. So the idea that it's us holding this debate up, we're wanting to have the debate. They're holding the debate up because they don't want to have it, because they know that if Joe Biden and his administration had to answer the tough questions, how long are we doing this? How much are we spending? How do we allocate finite resources among a very large number of challenges? How many more days are Americans expected to fund this war effort? What are we really trying to accomplish? Are we negotiating? Are we even trying to negotiate? There's so many questions that should form the core of a big debate about Ukraine. We won't have it because the Democrats are trying to protect their president.
And I want to just one quick follow-up. I think we're ready to shut things down as well. My old track coach used to tell me, don't tell me, show me. Our president says he supports Israel, but his actions actually embolden and support Iran. This president says he's against Putin, but his actions would be contrary to that. He still has only placed about half of the sanctions that he could on the Russian banking system as well. Why aren't we maximizing sanctions? If we're serious about this, maximizing our sanctions on both Iran as well as Russia before we send them more and more aid, which is basically unaccountable for. I think Americans have had enough. I think that Americans are demanding more transparency and that the priorities are different than what the White House seems to think are the priorities are. I think our priorities should be to secure our southern border, to stand beside Israel unequivocally and end this war against humanity. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.